recall that one of the major benefits of using shared coordinates is the ability to cross-link the two files to one another. So after we've linked a building into a site, we can then go into the building and link the site in, and it'll know exactly where to go. So I'm here in building I, and the first thing I want to point out is I'm in a 3D view, and as you can see here, the project base point and the survey point are spaced away from one another, quite a distance, and that is based on the fact that the shared coordinates were saved, and that's the separation between the two coordinate systems there. So I'm going to go to a more convenient view to work, like the site plan view. And what you're going to see here is that in this view, we're at the orientation of the overall site, because the site plan view is currently set to true north. If, however, I switch to the level 1 floor plan, you can see that it's oriented nice and horizontally, because now the view is set to project north. So this is the view that I'm going to work in here and show you how we can cross-link. Now, if you watched the previous chapter, then you saw how we could cross-link the site back into the building, and it would know exactly where to go with respect to the building. In this movie, what I'm going to do instead is I'm going to link in one of the other buildings. So you might recall that in the previous movie, we linked in buildings A, I, and M all to the site. Well, what if I wanted to see building M, for example, here in building I as I'm working, just to kind of see how it compares and where it's located for context purposes? Well, if I go to Insert and I click Link Revit, and I'll select building M, just make sure you're choosing by shared coordinates. And when you open that, it will display the location dialog. And here on the Site tab, you'll see the other sites that are saved here in Building M. Now, you may remember that Building I is occupying Platform 2. So Building M can actually come in either Platform 1 or Platform 3. And what's interesting about this is it allows you to experiment with different siting options. Now, initially, we brought it into Platform 3. That's where we located it in the previous movie. So let's start with that. When I click OK, notice that Building M comes in at exactly the correct location based on where it was located in the previous movie. So shared coordinates don't even have to be set up between these two files directly. Once they share the same coordinates of the site, they automatically share the coordinates of each other. And that's the really nice and very powerful benefit of this system. So when you have a project with multiple buildings on a campus, once you get this all set up, all the buildings become aware of one another. So at this point, maybe you go to a client meeting and they wonder what it might look like if building M were actually occupying Platform 1 instead of Platform 3. Well, now what you can actually do is select building M here and click over here where it says shared site is Platform 3. And what'll happen is you'll get a different dialog than we've seen previously. Because the shared coordinates are already set up, then it's basically going to allow you to modify those shared coordinates. So here we have an option to move this instance of the linked file to a different shared site, such as Platform 1. And when I click OK, it'll now jump over to the other side. So it becomes very easy for you to look at these two buildings in context to one another and compare how they might sit with one another with respect to Platform 1 or Platform 3 and make better design decisions. And you can do this all as a side benefit of the fact that we've already set up the shared coordinates. In the previous movie, we saw how we could link the various buildings to one another for coordination purposes. And we saw that once we'd set up the shared coordinates in that original set of files, that it actually applied to all of the files in the shared coordinates set. So taking a further advantage of that feature, I would like to show you another quick thing that we can do here. I have a file called Building B, and we haven't actually used this one in our collection yet, but I've gone ahead and saved the same shared coordinates here in Building B that were used in all of the other files. And I'm going to go to the site plan here in Building B, and as you can see, the orientation of this matches the original site because this site plan is currently set to true north. Now, to give us the context, let's go ahead and link in the site. So I'm going to go to the Insert tab, click Link Revit, and I'll select the file called Terrain, link it by shared coordinates, and click Open. And you can see the site comes in, and now it makes a little bit more sense. And notice that building B is currently sitting on the middle platform or platform 2. Now, what you can do actually within this file is to actually change what the active site is. And in so doing, it will actually reorient everything on the screen. Now, we've already seen some examples of this by just simply changing the setting of True North to Project North. So here in the site plan, if I change to Project North, you'll see that the building here in this file becomes parallel to the screen, and it rotates everything else to match that orientation. Go back to True North, and it sets everything back again. Well, watch what happens if we go to Manage and click the Location button. Here, I'll click the Site tab, and notice that I've got platforms 1, 2, and 3. Now, currently, the one called Internal is current, and that actually is a copy of Platform 2. So if I were to select Platform 2, make it current, and click OK, nothing will change. So they really are, those two are the same. So in fact, we could actually select Internal and delete it if we wanted to. We don't really need that copy. But what if I selected Platform 1 and made that current? Well, now what you're going to see is everything shifts in order to make that the active site. So in order to do that, it actually had to move the linked site file to correspond to the new location. Now, once again, if this was set to Project North, it would look like this. So let's keep it set to Project North in this case and go to Location and try Platform 3. So I go to Site, I choose Platform 3, and I make that current, and I click OK. And now it becomes maybe even a little bit more apparent what's actually going on. It literally just slid the site over and kind of rotated it slightly so that it would appear now as if that was the active site. And so in doing this, you can move building B from platform 1 to 2 to 3 and try it in different locations on the site. And you can imagine that if all the buildings have all the sites built in, it becomes really easy for you to shuffle them around. Now, if you want, you can actually link in additional files. Like, for example, if I link in building I for further coordination, make sure it's by shared coordinates, click Open. Now, building I only has the one safe site, platform 2, so I'll choose that and place it right there. And the important thing for you to understand when you're shuffling things around is Revit won't actually prevent you from using Platform 2 twice. In other words, if I go to Manage and click Location and go to Site and select Platform 2 and make that current, notice that it will happily make Platform 2 the current location, and it will superimpose building B and I directly on top of one another. So that's something you're going to have to manage on your own to make sure that you don't inadvertently do that. So the simple solution is to just make sure that in this case with building I linked in, that I choose either platform 1 or platform 3 as the current platform for building B, and then I will be able to link these two in correctly relative to one another. So by having multiple saved sites within each of your buildings, you gain this ability to be able to quickly try different siting scenarios for each of your buildings, and it allows you to make better design decisions throughout the course of the project. In the previous movie, we saw that we could take the same building and move it around onto different sites within the site file. In this movie, I'd like to look at how we can actually duplicate the building and put multiple copies on different sites. So if you think about a scenario such as a condominium development where you might have several of the same condominium building located in different locations on the site, this is the kind of scenario that we'd be looking at in this example here. So I've got building B situated here currently on platform 1, and I want to create a copy of building B and place it here on platform 3. So to do that, I need to actually select the linked file and then just copy it. Now I'm going to use just the standard copy tool. I'm going to do it right here in 3D, and I'm really just going to copy it anywhere. So you can see now that new copy is kind of sitting, floating out in space. Well, now all I have to do is select this copy. And if you look very carefully over here in the properties palette, what you're going to actually notice is that this recognizes this as a separate instance of that linked file. And so its shared site currently says not shared. But if we click back on the original building B, its shared site says platform 1. So this is important because each instance of the linked file can have its own location and can either be shared or not. So right now, this instance is not shared, but all I have to do is click on this button. And because these two files already are aware of one another, it does not display the acquire or publish dialog. That's a one-time setup. So once you've acquired or published the coordinates, you don't need to do that again. From this point on, now it's just simply a matter of managing our shared sites. Now, one option is to record the new position of building B at a new location. And you can see here it's suggesting the location internal, which is the current one. And if I click change, we've seen this dialog before. Now notice right here, it says platform 1 is currently in use. So we won't be able to actually move this instance of building B to platform 1 because you can't have two instances of the same link in the same location. Now you may recall from the previous movie, it did not prevent us from having two different buildings in the same location. It wasn't able to prevent us from doing that, but it is able to prevent us from having two copies of the same building in the same location. So this one is not available, but these other two are. So what I'm going to do instead of creating a duplicate or renaming internal and making a new location out here, I'm going to cancel that. And what I want to do is move this instance of the link to one of the saved locations. Now I'm not going to choose platform 2 because it's already being used by building I. So I'll choose platform 3 and I'll click OK. And just like that, you can make a duplicate of an existing instance of the link and then move it to another saved location. Now, if you don't already have the saved location, that's when you would use that second option. You would simply record the instance, click change, you would duplicate it, give it a new name. For example, platform 4. Okay, so if we went in and we created a new platform 4, it would just be a little bit more work because we just have to take the copy and position it more carefully in its new location. And then we would save that location as a platform 4 and then save the file. And it would update and be in that new location. And that new location would be available for placement of this building and other buildings. So if you want more than one copy of the same file, the same linked file in your project, it's very easy to do and it's very easy to manage with shared coordinates. You just simply need 2 or more saved locations in order to make that happen. Each instance of the linked building has to have its own saved location. So you can't reuse the same one twice. But as long as you have a unique location for each building, you can have as many copies of that link as you need to. This movie, we're going to look at what happens when you want to make changes to your projects that are set up with shared coordinates. So I'm going to look at 2 examples of changes. One is that I want to actually change the link that I'm using to represent one of my building files. So in a way, this can be similar to a sort of design options. Now, it's possible to have design options turned on in the main file, but if we're actually swapping out the entire link, then it might actually be easier to just swap in a different version of the link than it would be to actually set up design options for that. Now, if you're not familiar with design options, we actually have a course here at lynda.com on design options, and you're welcome to view that at your leisure. So let's go ahead and look at the process here of swapping out a different file. It's actually quite simple. You just simply need to go to Insert tab and click the Manage Links button. Locate the file that you want to change. So in this case, building AA, I want to change to a different linked file. So I'll select it. And then down here, I'm going to choose the Reload From button. That will take me to a browser window, and I'm going to choose building B instead. So I'll select building B, I'll click open, and it will load it in. And then when I click OK, you'll see that it will swap out building B in its place. Now, since I've loaded in a totally different file, what you'll notice is preserved the original positioning. However, it actually did not link it up automatically to the correct shared site. In fact, it says it's not shared. So the second step is to actually click the Not Shared button and then link this up with the correct instance of the site. Now, in this case, since building B has a copy of each of the saved sites, we can actually choose the one that we want here, platform one in this case, and click OK. It won't move or change in any way, but it will just simply link it up with that platform one so that it understands where it belongs on the site. Now, if you look carefully at the location at platform one, you'll probably notice something else is amiss there. So the second modification that I want to make is what actually happens when the site itself changes. So it's a little tough to see here in the elevation view. So what I'm going to do is switch to my site plan project north and kind of zoom in, and you'll notice that there's been a design change. Platform A has kind of moved and shifted slightly from its previous location. So in that situation, you actually want to take your link file that's associated with platform A and, move it and reorient it to the correct location. And to do that is actually pretty simple. You just simply repeat the steps that were used in the first place to put it there. So in this case, the align command will be the easiest way for me to achieve this. So I'll click the align command. So I'll align grid one, and then in this case, that's actually going to line up with grid two in building B. And when I do that, it'll actually generate a warning. Now, if you read the warning, it's telling me that I've actually just moved a building that's associated with the safe site. And this is an ignorable warning. I can actually ignore this if I wanted to by clicking OK. Or the other option it's giving me is to save now. Now, what this means is if you've actually deliberately changed the definition of platform one, then it's telling you that you can go right ahead and save this to that file. Now, I'm actually going to bypass that for now and click OK for two reasons. One is that I haven't finished moving it yet. So if I move it again, it'll just generate the same warning and I'll have to save it again. Two is I want to be sure that this is actually the change I want to make before I go ahead with that saving. So I'll go ahead and click OK there, make my second alignment. Then I'll go back to my elevation view and make sure that it is still lined up correctly here vertically. Now it is, but you're seeing that the terrain is kind of in the background there. It's kind of covering up part of it. So let's take a look at it in 3D. And you can kind of see that this excavation here is a little bit too deep for the terrain. So you might actually want to, move that up a little bit. So to do that, I can go back to the elevation, and I'm actually going to take the platform one level, and it looks like if I just move that a couple hundred millimeters, it should do the trick. So let me go 1300 and press OK. Now let's try 1500. And actually, I could go just a little more, 1600, and that should do the trick. So now you can see that we've kind of moved that thing up. But notice that the link is still at the previous location. So one more modification, I go to Align, I select the new location of level one, and then locate the level line of building B. Now make sure you watch your tooltips here and make sure it actually says building B so that you're getting the right one, and then you'll see that thing move up. So at this point, you've now changed the location of platform one in all three directions. So you certainly would want to save that change and make it permanent. Now, if I select building B, you can see that it's still associated with platform one, so it hasn't lost that association. In order to save it, all you need to do is save your file. And if you do, it will prompt you the same way it did when we first set up shared coordinates. Or if I cancel this, the other place where you can save it is to go to Insert and click Manage Links. Here I can select the link and notice that there's a checkbox in the Positions Not Saved box. So it's kind of subtle, but this is Revit's way of letting you know that there's a pending save here, that you've made a change to that saved location, but it hasn't yet been made permanent. So down here, there's a Save Positions button that I can click, and that will alert me that I need to save building B, at which point I would go ahead and click this link to make the save permanent. So if you're ready to do that, you can go ahead and click save. And that's how you can not only swap out a linked file with another file, but that's also how you can actually change the definition of any of your saved positions after the fact. Now it's important to understand that once I save this, I'm saving position 1 for all of the linked files. So it would actually make that change across any of the files that had an instance of position 1. And so later, if you swap out a different file in that location, it'll come in the correct spot. In this movie, I'd like to talk about what happens when you try to import a CAD file that is very large. Now, how large is very large? Well, Revit defines very large as a 20-mile radius. So in general, Revit prefers that all geometry for the project be within a 20-mile radius, or approximately 33 kilometers. I'm not really sure why they have that limitation, but I do know it has something to do with the differences in the way that Revit calculates precision versus the way other programs like, say, AutoCAD calculate precision. It's really not terribly important that we know exactly what those details are, just so long as we understand that this 20-mile radius is a good limit to stay within. So to illustrate what happens when you try to bring in a file that's bigger than that, I've got a few CAD files that we can import in and see the consequences. So let me go to Insert and click the Link CAD. So the first file I've called 20 miles, and you can see here from the preview that it's just a series of circles. So I'm going to accept all the defaults here and link it in origin to origin and click Open. And that will generate the 20-mile radius warning that I mentioned. And what it says here is that we might get some undesirable graphic behavior. Now, they don't exactly say what that undesirable behavior is, but they do try and warn us that we might witness some of that. So if I click OK, undeterred, I'll get a second warning that basically reiterates that the file is more than the 20 miles or the 33 kilometers. But you can see that the file does display on screen. So it's not that it will prevent you from bringing the file in. It's just kind of warning you that, precision might suffer a little bit, is essentially what they're saying. Now, I put some labels in here just to kind of tell you how big each of these circles are. So I just went 10 times the radius each time. So this one is 10 feet or, 3 meters. This one's 100 feet or 30 meters. And then it jumps to, 1,000 feet or 300. And then finally 10,000. And then way out here, we've got 100,000 feet or 30,000 meters. And here's your actual 20-mile limit right there, 105, 600 or 32. You can see they said 33 kilometers, but it's actually a little bit shy of that by my math. So this is the complete file. Now, the chances that you would actually have a file that fully took up the 20-mile radius is probably pretty slim. More often than not, what's actually going to happen is that you're going to be dealing with probably a site plan, and that site plan is going to have an origin that's way off screen. That might be several miles away, but the actual geometry of the site plan itself is a little bit more self-contained in a smaller area. We don't see too many building facilities or building campuses that actually are bigger than 20 miles. I mean, that's the size of a city. So I suppose if you were doing an entire city plan, you might run into that, but chances are you wouldn't be doing that all in one Revit project anyhow. So this is definitely on the extreme end of the example. So what I'm going to do is select this file and delete it. Now, just if I try to delete it, because we brought it in origin is pinned. So it'll tell me that I can't delete a pinned object until I, unpin it. So let's try that again. I'll unpin and then I'll delete. So the next file that I want to bring in is a little bit more typical, I think. This one here is called PBEX41, and it's actually included with AutoCAD. So if you have a copy of AutoCAD, they've been including this file in the sample files for AutoCAD for many, many years. And you can see over here in the preview that it's actually a site plan. Now, in my tests with this file, I found that it did not interpret the units correctly. So down here, usually I like to do auto detect unless I have a reason not to. So in this file, I have a reason not to. It wasn't working. So I'm going to choose feet instead. So I went into the file and I just measured a distance. I figured out what units it was using. And because it's a civil file, it's pretty common, at least in the United States, for civil engineers to use feet as their default unit. So we just tell Revit what unit the file was created in, and it will import it correctly. So sometimes you have to do that test first to make sure. So it's feet, and I'm going to do origin again. Now, what I want you to know about this file is, you can see the preview here. Well, the origin is actually way over here relative to that file. So you would expect that we would get the same warning. In fact, that origin is nearly 200 miles away from the site plan. So maybe it's like a state coordinate system. You sometimes see that with civil files where you're building the file, but they actually have the origin based on the state capital in another city. Well, you would expect that Revit would generate the same warning, but in fact, what's going to happen is even though I asked for origin to origin, when I click open here, Revit's basically going to recognize that the file is bigger than 200 miles, and it's going to ignore that because it's going to notice if I do zoom to fit, it's going to notice that all of the geometry in the file is actually well within the limit. So instead of using the origin that I asked for, Revit actually just used center to center. And it kind of put it right there in the middle of the screen. And somewhere here in the middle, we can see our project base and survey points, and you can see our elevation markers over here. So it is a fairly large file still, but still well within the required 20-mile radius, and it didn't generate a warning, right? The trouble is, if you start querying the coordinates and the locations in this file, it doesn't match what the civil engineer has. And so that might be a problem for the project team. So to illustrate the fact that this file really is the larger size, what I did was I kind of went into AutoCAD and I just opened that file up and I drew a circle at the origin. Now, if I do zoom extents here in this file, you can see that here is that circle I drew. And way over here is the rest of the file. And this distance here, from here to here, is actually, if I do a circle, from 0, 0 to about where that file is, you can see that it's a significant distance away, 85,000 feet away. So it's pretty large. So let's link this one in instead. And I'll take this one here, and I'll unpin it, and I'll remove it. We'll link that one instead, and that one will generate the warning. Let's keep it at feed, origin to origin. Click OK, and now we get the warning here, right? So the only difference between the two is that this one, if we do zoom to fit, would way over here where the file is, it would have the proper coordinates now. But that's kind of an extreme way to do it, to force it to give us the proper coordinates.